Thank you for joining us for a recorded web briefing delivered by the U.S. National Archives and Records Administration. This short briefing is intended for legal offices and federal agencies who are interested in understanding and potentially adopting a capstone approach within their agency. This briefing will give a high-level overview of the approach and related legal considerations. Let's join the briefing.
Hi, my name is Hannah Bergman, and I'm an attorney here at the National Archives. I'm going to provide you with a short briefing on legal issues that agencies might face in implementing Capstone, which is NARA's new approach to email records management. Here at the National Archives, my office, the General Counsel's office, has been really involved with the records officer for the agency as well as the office of the Chief Records Officer for the National Archives to implement this approach internally and to develop policies and procedures to provide guidance for other agencies in implementing the approach. We encourage all agencies to form a similar partnership and bring together representatives from their General Counsel's office, IT, records officer, FOIA and privacy, a wide variety of officials to work together to implement Capstone. So what is Capstone? Capstone is our new approach to email records management, which we believe will help agencies comply with the President's Records Management Directive, and that requires all agencies to manage email electronically by 2016. Like I said, this is just an approach. It's one way of doing things. We think it's the easiest way to do things, but agencies are free to develop better approaches if they have more sophisticated technology, better ideas and policies. We're open to those. The key benefit to Capstone is that it reduces the burden on end users so that automated rules are being used to determine whose records are permanent and that those records are captured and preserved and eventually accessioned into the holdings of the National Archives. And then there's a wide variety of employees within an agency, contractors as well, whose email records are going to be temporary. And Capstone is an approach that allows agencies to draw that line and then go ahead and dispose of temporary email records. And this determination is going to be based on the job of the end user within the agency. So you'll see here a pyramid that represents a Capstone implementation at a large department where you might have two sub-agencies as well as employees within the department headquarters. You'll see that some officials from each of the sub-agencies and the headquarters office will be permanent. Those are part of the Capstone, the top of the pyramid. And then a smattering of employees throughout the agency. The sub-agencies might also create permanent records based on their role within the agency. So Capstone is just an approach to managing email records that allows agencies to preserve permanent email while disposing of temporary email records. So one of the biggest issues that each agency is going to face in implementing Capstone is figuring out where to draw that line between permanent officials and temporary folks. I think as an attorney within an agency, you really want to make sure that you spend a significant amount of time thinking about where this line is drawn, as it's certainly a final agency decision that would be subject to challenge under the Administrative Procedures Act. And you want to document where the agency is going so that there's good evidence in a challenge that you are acting arbitrarily and capriciously. So how do you determine who is a Capstone official? I think you need to think about not just senior staff, but also program officials that create and receive permanent records. You want to think about how many people work within your agency. Generally, as a rule of thumb, 1 to 2% of the number of accounts that your agency might have are going to be Capstone official accounts. In general, the National Archives accessions as permanent records less than 3% of all the federal records that are created by all agencies. So this is just sort of a rule of thumb to think about when making your determination. You also want to consider how long-term vacancies in the agency might impact your policies and implementation. So if you have people acting in a particular capacity for 30 days or 6 months, you might have different rules about whether or not those individuals' records are permanent during that time period. You also want to think about how you'll handle agency reorganizations and whether or not that would affect who is a Capstone official and how you capture their records. So when implementing Capstone, you also you need to think about what might change within the agency. You want to ensure, essentially, that all your permanent email is being preserved and that it's going to be available for accessioning into the National Archives. You also want to ensure that the temporary email is being destroyed in a timely manner in accordance with your Capstone email records schedule. And you want to be comfortable with those changes. You want to be able to figure out how this affects your response to FOIA requests, to litigation, to congressional access requests, a wide variety of requests from sort of the outside world that for this body of records. You also need to think about how this will matter for litigation holds. So it's possible that an agency might say, oh, this body of records is permanent, these are Capstone official emails, and all other employee emails are going to be disposed of on a 7-year basis. So we're not going to keep employee emails for longer than 7 years when those employees aren't Capstone officials. That means that there might be some records that would have been subject to a 10-year retention schedule under your old approach that are going to be destroyed at the 7-year mark. Are you comfortable with that choice? What does that mean for your ability to respond to requests? What does that mean for your business processes? And the alternative, there are going to be some records that are now permanent that wouldn't have been permanent before. So you're going to have a new body of information that you're going to have to respond to requests for. I think all of these things are reasonable determinations for the agency to make, but you need to think about the consequences and sort of how you're going to go about implementing the approach. Litigation holds in particular can be challenging for agencies, and how your agency implements a litigation hold will be very dependent on what type of technology you have in place, whether you're using a journaling system for your email records or you're going to do records management on a live system, or you have a separate records management repository. I think all of those things will play into how you issue a litigation hold. But what we want to be clear about is that you need to think through that process, that the ways in which you issue a litigation hold and how you are able to respond to discovery requests will probably change as a result of your Capstone implementation. By merely implementing Capstone, you're not going to satisfy all the litigation hold needs of your agency, but you may satisfy some of them. So it's important to consider this and to work with the Department of Justice Counsel with regard to discovery issues before you change your approach wholesale. Finally, there are other implementation issues that you might want to consider from a legal perspective. Obviously, we at the National Archives care that you can get your Capstone permanent official records out of the system in which you keep them and export them in a format that works with our transfer standards so that we can then accession them and make them one day available to the public. We have metadata requirements in our regulations and in the transfer guidance that are going to outline what types of information you need to make sure are contained in the export. But on a day-to-day basis for you as an agency, things like e-discovery and FOIA are going to be affected by your ability to search these records and export them. It's also important that you think about how you're going to implement a plan for destroying temporary records. A key part of the Capstone approach is empowering agencies to delete and destroy records that are eligible for destruction under their record schedule. But if an agency doesn't take that action, then it's not really defensible deletion. You're still holding on to those records when they should have been deleted in accordance with agency policy. And that can present some challenging legal issues for you. So in order to have a successful implementation of Capstone, not only is it important that you preserve and transfer permanent Capstone officials' email, it's also important that you destroy on a regular schedule the temporary records that are part of the email repository as well. And then you also want to think about whether or not an agency is going to need more than the permanent and the temporary bucket. There are some agencies, depending on their structure, where it might be appropriate to retain a bucket of email for 15 years. For example, in our general counsel's office, we have a body of records that we previously called significant legal advice. And we're not really comfortable with the idea of letting that all go out the door with our regular default email retention rules in 7 years. So we're thinking about how we might want to manage that, whether or not it's appropriate to manage those records separately, keep another copy of them, or if there's some way we can change the default rules in the system to keep our information a little bit longer. There also might be, depending again on how your agency is structured, a set of employees who email does not need to be retained for 7 years, but maybe for 3 years, for example. would be a reasonable retention period. So it's possible that each agency is going to have a little bit different implementation, and those are just things that we want you to think through. Thank you very much. That concludes our legal issues briefing. And if you have any other questions, there'll be contact information on the email records management page on archives.gov, and we're happy to answer your questions. Good luck.
We hope that you have found this briefing useful. For more information about the U.S. National Archives and Records Administration and the Capstone email approach, please visit us online at www.archives.gov, keyword email management.